It may not show, but she has giant brass balls. Let's give a warm round of applause for Captain Linda Sollars.
And when I asked my high school counselor, and they said, well, you can't be a pilot because you're a girl. So I decided to go ahead and get an MBA in finance because you know what? I believed the people who told me I couldn't be a pilot. And lesson number one. During my first finance class, my finance professor, Lou Mandel, mentioned that he had a small 150 at the local airport. In the January of 2019, I heard the rumor that they were coming out with a high wing. And from that moment, I knew instantly that was my aircraft. Know your stuff, study your stuff, figure out how you learn and remember things best, and put all that together and ask questions and dig deep.
Hey guys, it's Matthew from Sling Pilot Academy. Just this last week, we had Captain Linda Sollars stop by the hangar to talk to some of our students and CFIs about how she got into the aviation career, what it's been like for her so far, what it's like to fly a single-engine aircraft all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and more. Stay tuned to find out. Today, I'm here with Captain Linda Sollars. For those of the Sling family that don't know you yet, who are you?
I am, from the Sling perspective, one of the things that distinguishes me is I was the first customer to build the wonderful new model of Sling, the Sling High Wing.
Linda is an incredibly adventurous person. She's multi-talented. She's well-traveled. She's had a life of firsts, a life of adventures. She's an A&P mechanic. She was the first person to build a Sling High Wing at the factory. And she's flown the Sling High Wing across the Atlantic Ocean. So it may not show, but she has giant brass balls. So with that being said, it gives me great pleasure, and let's give a warm round of applause for Captain Linda Sollars. Thank you, Linda. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm glad it's actually a little warmer today than it has been in sunny Southern California in the last few days. So when I was preparing for this, I did a web search for childhood dreams. And what do you think came up the most? Astronaut. What else? This is a fascinating thing. And what's fascinating about this is when I do this talk, and I do it primarily in front of aviation crowds, oftentimes people are like, doctor, lawyer, fireman. No, it's flying. Astronauts close, but people, by and large, most of the images, go ahead and do a search yourself, but so flying, and I'm no different from that. So I was a child of the 60s and 70s, and back then, my inspiration for flying were things like The Flying Nun, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Anybody heard of that? Is this so far out? Okay, thank you very much. My very favorite book as a child, Snoopy and the Sopwith Camel. I wanted to fly like Snoopy. And as I got older and I was in high school, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And not only could Jonathan Livingston Seagull fly, what I really took from that book, and I have to admit it's been decades since I read it, was the joy of doing what you love to do that actually also you feed yourself with. Just so happens that's how you eat too, but that you can enjoy the thing you do that helps you eat. But back in the 70s, when I was in high school, this is what flight crews look like, right? In fact, the first female pilots at a major airline in the United States wasn't until 1973. And when I asked my high school counselor, that I told her that I wanted to be a pilot and fly like a bird, when I found out such a thing existed, I had no pilots in my background, none in my family, I knew nothing about it, no neighbors. And they said, well, you can't be a pilot because you're a girl. And I like to say that they were wrong for the right reasons because of this. It was mostly out of the military. Women did fly in the military in the 70s, but very few people knew, and it wasn't the more well-publicized fighter pilots. So I decided to go ahead and get an MBA in finance because you know what? I believed the people who told me I couldn't be a pilot. And lesson number one. during my first finance class, my finance professor, Lou Mandel, mentioned that he had a small 150 at the local airport. And I went down to the local airport that day in 1985, and I have been flying ever since. I had an aircraft for about 20 years, a Cessna T210, loved it, great plane. Became an airline pilot kind of later in life. Had the great opportunity to switch careers and pursue my childhood dream, become an airline pilot. And I found that while I was doing that, I was spending more time flying around, taking advantage of my travel benefits, traveling internationally, and I really wasn't using my personal plane that much, so I decided to sell it and begin what turned out to be about an 18-year search for my retirement aircraft. I had a very specific list of criteria.
That's what I was going to ask. What were you looking for?
I had been a low-wing driver before the Cessna, but once I had a high wing, I fell madly in love with the design. It has so many wonderful features. You can look down, and the big reason why I go up is to look down. And so you have an unimpeded view. I do fly in the rain, so you have an umbrella when you get out. I like to be able to park stuff underneath it in the hangar. I can hang hammocks underneath it. There's shade. Plus, it's ingress and egress, not just for me and my passengers. And, let's face it, a lot of people in my age range have new knees, new hips, blah, blah, blah. But also getting your toys in and out. I could put an electric bike, or I can put my suitcases in very easily in a high wing. Tons of reasons that I prefer the high wing design. So that was a definite. I considered twin engine aircraft. But especially if I was only going to have one engine, I wanted the most reliable engine I could get. And when I started this, and I think it's still true today, comment below and tell me if you think there's another option. But that for me was the Rotax. And I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to be here and have the opportunity to share the story. So I started to prepare as I was getting closer to retirement. And we bought a home on an airstrip up in North Carolina in that beautiful mountain air. I started looking all over the place. I put deposits down. I visited manufacturers. I even went and took an engine maintenance course in one of the aircraft I was considering. I looked high and low, but nothing. And either the certified, because remember, I took 2 years off to get my AMP to keep my maintenance costs down, so I didn't have to have an experimental to do my own work or to keep the costs down. But nothing met my thing. So I just waited because I had time. Then in 2016, I found Sling at Sun and Fun. And I flew there and the TSI was on the table. It was going to come out, and it looked really good. And I was really, really tempted. It was the first time I was super tempted by a low-wing aircraft. But I just wasn't willing to compromise on my criteria. And then in the January of 2019, I heard the rumor that they were coming out with a high wing. And from that moment, I knew instantly that was my aircraft. And that is why I ended up being the very first person to build the Sling High Wing. I didn't have a hangar yet, so I bought a commercial building, and I actually promoted the Sling build, the Naples Youth Aviation Project, which, by the way, I'm glad to say, they finished the project. These 17 middle and high school students, they were 10 to 16 when they started, built a two-place Sling, sold it, and the proceeds are all going for scholarships, and now they're going to build a high wing. And the kids from the build are going to be the mentors on the next build. Anyway, so I had a great time. Those are the kids getting ready. I was loving life. So here's where the fun begins. So Sling if you don't know, which everybody in this audience does know, has a long pedigree of doing crazy long adventures in brand new airplanes. It's been a way that they've been able to test and prove the aircraft, but it's also why they're such incredible airplanes. I'm spoiling a little bit, but I've had the opportunity to do a lot of flying around with Mike and James, and they really live the plane when they do these adventures. It's not just clickbait, it's not just for promotion. I mean, they really sit down after the flight in front of the braai and with a scotch in their hand and say, okay, what could we do better? And that's part of what makes them so great. So we decided to fly all 3 planes. Think about my plane, which looks a little different. She's had a facelift when she was here. This is JP's beautiful tail wheel, and SHW, the original prototype. So we decided on making the trip, and the crew, the complement of crew. So this is Mike Blythe. He came with me. Matt now owns SHW, the prototype. You'll hear more about him. That's James over on the far side. So Matt and James were with the flying the prototype, and JP was in his beautiful airplane with his buddy William, who was going to be doing some filming. So that was the complement of crew, and then we started to prepare. This is the tanks that we made because we were going to need extra fuel. So we have 64 gallons in the wings. We had another 88 in the fuselage. And so we made those tanks at there. There you can see us testing out all of our safety gear. Here's all the equipment that we were taking in addition to that. So in addition to the fuel, we had water, we had our safety gear, we had rations, all kinds of stuff. We had computers. We had the plugs for the computers, which weighs more than the computers sometimes. So this turned out to be the best route for that time of year. This is the, the hurricane making intercontinental convergence zone, but it meant we were going to have a nice tailwind, and the water's warmer than if we went up, and it's shorter. It's the closest route directly to Oshkosh that we could do. So this was the route that we had tentatively planned. Obviously, we were going to wait and see how it all unfolded. So we were leaving Tedder Field. If you don't know, Sling's factory is, it's multi-locations now, but it's Tedder Field as a airfield south Johannesburg, and they have some other parts of their operation over in the industrial area. So we loaded up there, and we went over to Lanseria. And the reason we go to Lanseria is because we needed a lot of fuel. So we needed a lot of runway. Now remember, at the time, all these planes had the 915 engine in them. Mine now sports a 916, I'm pleased to say, but at the time. So we knew we wanted a lot of runway, and we tested the plane. Mike and I put more and more and more weight in my plane, and then we flew, and then we put more weight, and then we flew, and we put more weight, and we flew up till the point where we were comfortable with the amount of runway that we had. So we had tested quite a ways towards what our final load was going to be in any case, but we got the fuel, we went to Lanseria, which is also in Johannesburg, and then the first leg was from Johannesburg to Luanda. So we did that, and that was 10 hours. And when we landed in Luanda, they had a brake failure on the prototype, and I unceremoniously kicked Mike out on the middle of the taxiway while I ran to go pee because it was a bit of a challenge. So, but there we were. That was our first leg. Then the next leg, we went up to Accra, and that was 9.5 hours. And that was really, we started to really go over some serious water there. We wouldn't have been able to get to land had we had any issues there. And then when we got to Accra in Ghana, the challenge was the fuel. They had folks, we had contracted with some folks to bring us fuel, and they got there and they didn't have the insurance anymore because of COVID. Nobody was ordering 100 low lead. There was only jet fuel. So they had these people come on to the front. So it took us an extra day. But the good news about James is a lawyer by training. So the good thing about flying with your own lawyer is he was able to do an indemnification and get us through it. So we got a little bit postponed, but we made that happen. Oh, and did I mention that one of the great things about having a high wing airplane is to have shade when you're sitting out waiting for your fuel? Yeah, that's great. And then from there we went up to Praia, which is in Cape Verde. I can still remember there's the controller at Praia. So we were a flight of 3. Nobody ever told me what fun it was to formation fly. Is that not a blast? Oh my God, I can't wait to show you tomorrow. It is so much fun. And so we were formation flying this whole time. And when you formation fly, one person is talking, and the other people, we actually even turned our transponders off. So there's one transponder, and we're all going. But we each had a Indigo sat, and part of our survival gear included, we each had a Garmin InReach. So we were communicating with the Indigo sat when we could, but we also could text back and forth with the little Garmin InReach. It's a great piece of equipment. And we also wore it on ourselves so that if we went down, they could identify, they could find us. But the controller at Praia, it was just so lyrical and beautiful. Praia, Zulu Uniform Zero Hotel Whiskey Praia. It was just lyrical and lovely. So we had a great time. We went around that way just to avoid airspace that we didn't have permissions to get in. And we got to Praia. Now in Praia, we knew they weren't going to have, they only had jet fuel. We knew they weren't going to have 100 low lead. But we figured we'd figure it out when we got there. And sure enough, when we landed at Praia, all of us except for Matt, who owns SHW, I mentioned him before, he's actually also quadriplegic. He got into a cab and sorted out everything. He got barrels, he got a pump, he got a truck, all organized. And the next day we spent 9 hours going back and forth, 4 barrels at a time. We had to clean the barrels that had oil in them, so we had to clean them out. So we went back and forth, and it was great fun. We had a really good time. Oopsies. When we were trying to leave for Oshkosh the next day, we had a big storm. We had to come back, plant it, and then wait for the storm to pass, and then off we went. So we made it to Oshkosh. Finally, we were greeted as heroes. There was over 100 South Africans there to greet us. They come every year. They're an incredible group. They come, and this led me, so here we're going to reflect again. I had no idea how this experience was going to change everything for me. People were following us. People were praying for us. People were worried about us all the way across the Atlantic and for the whole trip for that matter. And there was a lot of social media attention, and I really didn't do any social media at the time. But I sort of ended up becoming an unintentional influencer between all the attention that we got at Oshkosh. And then people started writing articles, and I was doing podcasts, and more talks, and more invitations to have conversations, and I love it. I love it because what's happened for me is, he'd mentioned I've been all over the world doing these talks, and I'm invited again next year. I'm going to Tokyo, Australia, more Poland, all kinds of wonderful places, and I meet the most amazing people, and I have the most amazing opportunities to fly some incredible aircraft. And I mean, I'd make a distinction between travel and touring. I like to tour and go and look at the architecture, visit a museum, learn a little bit. But for me, travel is you go, you have a project, you get to know the people, you get involved, you get invited to their homes, and you learn about the culture. And that's the kind of travel that I love to do. And this has given me the opportunity to do that. But not only that, as I've been doing the talks, I've had the opportunity, and the air shows, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of the people who've been following the story, our story, my story, and hear the impact that I had on them, which was totally unintentional, but it was surprisingly rewarding. I mean, people are like, oh, you gotta you talk about it, you gotta do a book. I'm like, yeah, it's nice, I don't really care enough, I've gotta do my own adventure. But the more I met people, the more I realized how much it filled me up. So none of this was, and again, what I want to impress upon you is that none of this was planned, and all of it is welcome. So just keep in mind that to be open to it. This is my #1 fan. Her dad was concerned that she was not, and I have permission to tell the story, her dad was concerned because she was very insecure and people were bullying her at school. So he intentionally introduced her to my videos and then brought her to Sun and Fun to meet me. And it changed everything. I'm gonna get emotional just talking about it. So, it was very wonderful. So I decided, okay, that's what I am going to do. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to get the story out there because it seems to be helping people, and I'm having the great honor. When I was just in Argentina, there was a woman who traveled 7 hours to meet me, and she didn't speak English. And I don't speak Spanish. And she sat there all day waiting for me to give a presentation that she didn't understand. And then I went to do the next presentation, and 2 of the people there had made gifts for me to bring me. I mean, it's just been such an incredible gift. Incredible people. and because I've been meeting with people from the road tax world, the aviation world, and the sling world, and flying around in slings all over the place. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Taking a step back, how is it being an airline pilot? How has it been for you? And what advice do you have for, people, but specifically young women out there that are looking to get into aviation?
Well, it's wonderful. I love being an airline pilot. I mean, passion, like everything about it. I love it when the weather's good. I love it when the weather's bad. I love working with the customers. I love working with the first officers. I'm a captain now, or was captains when I was a first officer. The in-flight crew. I even like watching the little bag carts run around the airport. There's a magic that happens in an airline. There are all these people, because the absolute magic of SOPs, standard operating procedures, is that people who've never met each other, never, can get together and perform this miracle of flight and take these people safely to their destinations in these extraordinary, magical aircraft. I am delighted to say that there are a lot more women that I am having the opportunity to work with than when I started. Women, there's a phenomenon known as the confidence gap. And it's an intriguing and well-studied phenomenon. There's a book, I believe it's called The Confidence Gap. They noticed this trend when they would talk to these women. A lot of them would give away their accomplishment. They would excuse it away, and they started noticing this over and over again. And so what I say is confidence comes from being well prepared, right? But that doesn't mean you have to know it all. So if you prepare well, you have the tools to suss out and make decisions. So you don't have to know everything, but you have to know enough to have the tools to figure it out. Know your stuff, study your stuff, figure out how you learn and remember things best, and put all that together and ask questions and dig deep. And then, this is probably controversial, before I get a lot of comments on this, never let them see you sweat. If you're nervous and stuff, as a captain, you need to exude confidence. You don't want to get your first officer flustered, right? You don't want your passengers to get nervous. But also, and I'd say that whether you're a guy or a gal, right? That doesn't matter. I mean, that's a piece of advice for everybody. And I think it's particularly, when you think about this confidence gap thing, I think it's a particularly useful tool for women.
Valuable. Pretty much it sounds like what you're saying is, regardless of your gender, know your strengths and weaknesses. Don't use your weaknesses as excuses. Instead, find out ways that you can build upon those to get yourself to where you want to get anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly. I can't think of anybody else that I know of that's in the last year been to Africa, Argentina, and Canada to fly their personal plane.
Yeah, a few others, but yeah.
Those are just the ones I know off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a lot more.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, I want to fly. Yeah, it's interesting because flying the plane is the easy part. Doing some of these grand adventures, it's not about flying the plane. It's the permission, and the planning and the fuel and everything else. And when I we did the trip across the Atlantic. We sort of glossed over that, but it was 2,100 miles, nautical miles over the Atlantic. And so we had to have extended range tanks in the fuselage. It carried it wonderful, no problem. But I had the easy part of that whole trip. From Johannesburg, we flew all the way to Oshkosh. And I just flew this wonderful new plane that I had with this amazing legend, Mike Blythe, totally trapped with me. He couldn't get away at first, sucker. And it was just wonderful. But now that I'm going off, getting ready to branch off and do some of my own adventures, I got to do all the hard work that Sling and JP and everybody else dealt with all the bureaucracy and stuff like that. So it's a learning curve. But so I don't want to overstate my prowess on that. So I was just flying the plane. They did all the heavy lifting on that. But it was great fun. And I'm looking to doing more. And there too, there's a bunch of websites, the Earth Rounders, places that I'm going to learn more and more about how to pull it off. So I'm excited.
Well, thank you for talking to us, and I wish you luck in all your adventures coming up.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.